2.1, Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. I would just like to point out that 2.1 is when I started taking notes online. So I'll still have the book right in front of me. I will have those, and that's what I will mostly be following. Let's start with structure. So as we know, one of the compromises made at the Constitutional Convention was to have a bicameral legislature. So that means there's two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. In the House, every 2 years there is a total re-election, and in the Senate, there is also an election every 2 years, but it's only for a third of the Senate, which means that it's a continuous body. So House representatives serve for 2 years at a time, and the Senate, senators serve for 6 years at a time. Demographically, Congress is mostly men and mostly white. And then we know the House of Representatives, that represents a state depending on population. So Wyoming has a lot fewer representatives than California. But in the Senate, Wyoming and California, they both get 2 senators. And both chambers have to approve legislation. Now the 17th Amendment, I like to remember this one by thinking 17 senator. So originally, the states elected senators, state legislators elected senators, but now the people can elect senators. So it gave way to a greater democracy and less of an elite democracy. So 17th, senators elected by the people. On page 102, there is a little table with differences between House and Senate. So that's a nice little tool if you need one. Now, tax or revenue laws, those have to start in the House. And identical bills have to pass in both houses with a simple majority, then the president signs it. So that's a very basic how law is made. Now, caucuses. These are made up of like-minded people who unite around this specific belief or concern. Now, each party has one in each house, each political party, and those groups will elect leaders and stuff. But then you also have these smaller caucuses for more specific interests, and they're not officially part of the process of making laws, but they can create legislative things. Now, coalitions are more of these working relationships, and these are found more commonly between senators because they have longer terms. Whereas in the House, they are up for re-election every 2 years versus the 6 in the Senate. Now, Congress and its powers. Article 1, Section 8 deals with the enumerated powers, so the powers that are given to Congress in the Constitution. And that's power to raise revenue, declare war, power of the purse, coin money. They have their implied powers from the necessary and proper clause. They use the commerce clause a lot, like we talked about in those last required cases. They determine military salary. The president also proposes a budget, which the Congress members then decide how to spend. Although the president is still the chief commander, Congress has powers to draft people. They fund military foreign endeavors and foreign aid. The Senate confirms presidential nominees, and they ratify treaties with a 2/3 vote. Although, I was talking about the president multiple times, the president's powers, as commander-in-chief, does interact in certain ways. The president can use executive orders to impact the foreign policy and make executive agreements, but we'll get more into that later. In the president's chapter, the executive branch. Congress passed the War Powers Act, which requires the president to let Congress know within 48 hours of committing U.S. forces to combat so that Congress can vote within 60 days to approve the military force and funding. An example of how the president and Congress have to interact with this military and foreign conflict side of things. And I was talking about implied powers and the necessary and proper clause. We see this in McCulloch versus Maryland, which we talked about last chapter topic unit. In my last video, it's a required case. But yeah, Congress has powers that are implied that aren't specifically listed because of the necessary and proper or elastic clause. Now, some differences between the House and the Senate. The Senate has this thing called advice and consent, which deals with senators being able to approve presidential appointees. So high-level appointees, the Senate will hold a confirmation hearing, and then they will take a vote, given that this committee with the confirmation hearing approves the candidate. Nominee, I guess I should say. They also have to 2/3 vote approve any sort of treaty. The Senate is also less centralized with looser debate, a higher focus on foreign policy, and the leaders in the Senate are less powerful than in the House, unless you're talking about like the majority leader. Now the House. The House deals with a lot more tax and money stuff. If there's a tie in a presidential election, they will be the tiebreakers. They initiate impeachment. They are more centralized and hierarchical, with like a rules committee that controls the agenda. They have more limited debate time, a very powerful Speaker of the House, and yeah, like I said, all that revenue and spending stuff. Oh, and then the Senate holds the trial for impeachment. Impeachment starts in the House, and then Senate does the trial for impeachment. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. Let me know how you felt about this video. I feel like it was a little wonkier than usual. Or maybe that's just because today's been a little weird. But, like and subscribe.